Okay, so the first part of our mixed media project is actually to paint the background. So I want you to think of this as like a wallpaper of sorts, but we're going to use watercolor. I'm using my dried watercolor palette from the other day. I'm just going to re-wet them with my paintbrush and paint. I'm going to start with a solid color in the background. I should have used a bigger brush, but that's okay. And then if you remember from my watercolor painting example sheet, there's a couple ways of painting with watercolor. There is painting wet color on wet paper next to more wet paints, or you can do wet color on dry paper next to wet paint, or wet color on dry paper next to dry paint. So there's kind of three ways of doing it. All three of them give you different results. So please watch that video before you choose how you're going to paint your background. I am using the technique wet paint on wet paper. So right here, I'm kind of wetting the paper down before I add the paint. And then I'm going to paint wet color over the top of wet paint. So I want all of my paint to really bleed and blend. I don't want anything to be very sharp or stark. I want it all to be a nice gradiated fade. Oops, my paintbrush just broke, but I think I'm going to keep using it. You don't have to paint all the way to the bottom of your paper, but I'm not exactly sure how my composition is going to go. So I went ahead and went all the way to the bottom anyway. We are going to cover up most of this, but I'm not sure what parts we're going to cover up or not. So I'd rather have it all painted before I move on than have to go back and repaint some of it. So I'm going to add some color throughout this, but again, I'm painting wet on wet. So I want these color, they're like streaks of color. I want them really to blend into that background. So notice how when I paint it, it starts to bleed, and that's the look I'm going for. I want it to be a really like dissipated color. Then I'm going to make a nice purple. So I'm going to mix this blue in with this red. I need a lot of blue in order to get it to the purple I'm looking for. And I'm going to do the same thing, just adding streaks of this color, wet on wet, so it bleeds and blends, and it's going to kind of merge together. And then I'm going to set that aside to dry, and stay tuned for the next video for the next part of our project.